When I first started backpacking, I loaded up an 80-liter backpack with about 70 pounds of things, and I set off to hike the Appalachian Trail in 2012. Though I had a really great time doing that and a really great experience overall, I hobbled away from that experience thinking that something needed to change. My knees hurt, I thought I had a broken ankle. I wound up getting off the Appalachian Trail, even though I set out to do the whole thing, because I was just in pain every day. And that's not really very fun. So now 12 or 13 years later, about 18,000 miles of hiking later, and ultralight backpacking has been the biggest influence that has kept me hiking for as much as I have and for as long as I have since. So what is ultralight backpacking? Why has it had such an influence on me? Well, when someone says that they're ultralight, it means that their pack weight, their gear altogether, weighs less than 10 pounds. These days, going ultralight is more simple than it ever used to be. With knowledge absolutely everywhere, like on this YouTube channel, with thousands of companies that are absolutely focused on making ultralight specific gear, and new high-tech fabrics that just didn't exist decades ago. It's really incredible how much gear and how much stuff you can fit into a 10-pound base weight. I think the largest advantage to going ultralight versus any other style is that it increases your enjoyment of the hiking itself. That it is absolutely no secret that hiking up a mountain in remote areas on difficult terrain is hard, and carrying less weight is going to make that easier and a lot more fun. There's also going to be a lot less chance for injury. You know, carrying a very heavy load is putting a lot of stress on your knees, on your hips, on your ankles, and all of your joints and muscles. And people that are carrying a more traditional setup, a heavier setup, are going to get injured more frequently than someone who is carrying an ultralight setup. With an ultralight pack, you can also cover more miles in a day, which for me was one of the absolute biggest reasons that I stuck with it in the beginning. Was because I only had 2 days off from work at a time. I couldn't take any more, and I wanted to see more and do more in that time that I had. So with an ultralight kit, I was able to cover more miles with less effort. So I want to share what I believe is the easiest way that you can go ultralight. And then the second half of this video, I'll go through some rapid fire tips on just specific things that you can do to lighten up and get down to that 10-pound base weight. The absolute easiest way to go ultralight is to simply carry less things. It is 100% free to do, and all it requires is a little bit of extra critical thinking on your part or my part. This is by far what has worked for me the most over the years. Laying all of my gear out on the floor and asking myself what is truly necessary for the conditions I'll be facing on my upcoming trip. Some examples of this would be, if you're hiking in the summer, you can bring less layers. In dry environments, you can bring less rain protection. Camp shoes are fun, but they're also pretty heavy and don't pack well and not really doing anything for your survival. You can leave behind your camera and use your phone instead. And maybe consider that after a long day of hiking, you will be too tired to read that book, use that painting kit, that frisbee, or other luxury items that are nice in theory, but often goes unused. I'm not telling you to be some Zen Buddhist monk and to carry nothing at all and to fast for your entire hike. But what I am saying is to look at your gear more critically, to go through everything and to really ask yourself if you need it. Back in 2012, this was my first big step in lightening up and making backpacking more fun. The first time I did this, I laid out all my gear, I went through it, I was able to get rid of 25 pounds worth of things for free, instantly. And since that first trip, since that first time of ever doing this process, I have never carried those items again. They truly were unnecessary. Now, I doubt you're gonna find 25 pounds of things to leave at home because maybe I was a bit special of a case, but I'm sure you're gonna find something, and every little bit counts because in the end, it really does add up. After I gave my gear the good old eye test, I took it to the next level by taking the time to weigh each item in my kit and to write that down. Use a website like lighterpack.com to do this, as it makes everything easy and fun. Weighing my gear in the end turned out to be quite the interesting process, as in the end it really helped me look at my things even more critically than before. And even better was that it helped me compare my gear list, what I was taking on my trip, to what other people were taking on their trip. I noticed immediately a decade ago that my tent weighed about 3 times as much as many others out there, that my quilt was 2 times as heavy, and to top it all off, I was carrying all sorts of little things that many other people, most people, weren't carrying at all, and maybe weren't necessary at all. So this gave me very clear areas on where I could upgrade in the future. Very clear areas on what I could get rid of because no one else was using it, and it just gave me a great tool for comparison. So in the end, I guess the point of this exercise is just that knowledge is power, and through a small little kitchen scale and a website like lighterpack.com, you can gain a lot of knowledge. For me, something that I always like to keep in mind is that 10 pounds is equal to 160 ounces. I feel like that kind of puts the small things into a greater perspective of that it really doesn't take that many ounces to equal 10 pounds. So not only do these ounces add up quickly, but I should choose my ounces with care. As an example, looking at some random gear list online from someone who's hoping to hike the Appalachian Trail, at first glance, the list looks great. The items look great, they have the right gear, they're gonna be safe, they're gonna be comfortable. But then once I look a lot closer, I notice that they have a lot of small things that really add up to a lot of weight. That they not only had a cook pot, but they also had a little coffee mug and then another little pot for who knows what. They had 2 pillows and 2 sleeping mattresses. They had all sorts of tiny little electronic things and gadgets. So anyway, the list goes on. Now, any one of those little tiny items I had mentioned doesn't really weigh that much, but you combine them all, you put them all together, and it really equals out to quite a bit. So I think it's good not just to focus on the really big items, the really big pieces of gear, but to also focus on all of the small things as well. Now, if you want to jump right in and go ultralight immediately, the absolute easiest way to do that is through lighter weight fabrics. Now, this is huge when you're looking at shelters or when you're looking at sleeping bags, because those are very large items which require a lot of fabric. So if you're looking for the most bang for your buck, it is investing in, spending the money on a nice quilt and a nice tent. Now, a great example of this is a company called Durston Gear, which makes their tents in 2 different fabrics, one which is more budget friendly, and then one, the high-end Dyneema. So their 2-person tent in Dyneema weighs 18 ounces, whereas that same exact tent in Sil Poly weighs 35 ounces. So that is more than a pound of difference for functionally the same item. Now, these differences in weight are going to be even more pronounced when you're going from a company like REI to an ultralight focused company like Durston Gear. So you could easily be saving 5 pounds by just switching from an REI made tent to a Durston tent, and you could be saving like 3 pounds by switching from an REI sleeping bag to an Enlightened Equipment sleeping bag. So shelters and sleeping bags are absolutely what I would recommend upgrading first, because those are going to have the most bang for your buck. Now, my next tip is about where you buy your gear. When looking to get new things, I will recommend that you don't go to a store like REI or MEC or Backcountry. Instead, look for small, ultralight focused cottage brands instead. As I alluded to before, a piece of gear that you get from REI is oftentimes going to be like 5 times the weight of that same piece of gear that you got from a cottage, small, ultralight focused brand. So if you're not going to REI or one of those other big box kind of backpacking stores, where do you go? Well, I highly recommend checking out garagegrowngear.com. They are like REI, but they are only an online retailer, and they focus solely, exclusively on just small ultralight brands that are out there. They are a marketplace for ultralight gear in every single category, from backpacks to shelters to little doodads and electronics. Garage Grown Gear is awesome. No, they are not sponsoring this video, but I just think they're really cool. As every single time I go on their website and I surf through all the new items, I see things that I never would have known existed otherwise. So not only can this be a good place to look for lighter weight alternatives, but it can also be a fun place to look just for weird ultralight gear that exists. Because nowadays there is an absolute ton of that, which is awesome for all of us. One of the ways I've managed to go ultralight on every trip I've done in the last decade, no matter if I'm hiking in the desert, high alpine, grizzly country, a rainforest, or whatever, is because of planning and research. Knowing the weather, knowing what to expect, can go a long way with the gear that is required. So the idea here with planning and research and how that impacts your ultralight journey is that there should be no what-if items. You should know with fairly high certainty, in pretty black and white terms, what is and isn't going to happen. And I truly believe that you can do that and know that just through some planning and research. So take a moment to look into the weather, the temperatures. Is this a buggy time of year? Will there be other people around? What the trail, terrain, and surrounding environment is like. Like if I'm going out to hike the Pacific Crest Trail and I'm starting on May 10th, I have a pretty great idea of what all of that is going to be like, simply through doing research and looking into other hikers that had hiked at that same time before. I can look at trends in the weather patterns from over the years for different months across the year. You know, I can search around to see what kind of predictions there are for this year and what the weather is going to be like. And of course, all of this is going to heavily impact what kind of gear you're gonna need out there and what you can leave at home, which is maybe even more important. So my final tip is to take a lot of trips near home. Short overnight hikes where you can get out, you can test your gear, you can get used to your gear. The lighter you're going to go, the more valuable this kind of experience and these kind of skills that you're going to learn are. Because sometimes you are replacing gear that you've left at home with skills and experience. That would be through campsite selection and thermoregulation and planning and research, recognizing weather patterns when you're in potentially dangerous areas. These are much better things to be learning when you have the safety net of a friend to come pick you up in 10 minutes than when you are across the country in some remote area where you don't know anyone. So doing this in different weather, doing this in different seasons, trying out all sorts of different gear is a huge fast track to an incredible amount of learning. You don't need to go out and hike the Appalachian Trail to become an expert. You can do that near home through lots and lots of little trips and trying different things. Okay, so that's the big theory behind ultralight backpacking and how to do it. You know, with all that information, you're basically a professional right now. So we talked about the theory, but let's look at some specific tips. Things that are really gonna get you going right now. So first off, I gotta mention that the biggest place I see people carry too much is clothing. Clothes are bulky, they're heavy, and you should look extra deeply at this area. See if you can make small things smaller. Can you get a smaller bottle of sunscreen? Could you use a smaller battery bank? What in your kit could be smaller? A trekking pole tent is lighter weight than one which has designated tent poles, which you then have to carry. You're already going to be using trekking poles, so why not make those work for you in different ways? This is a cool way shelter makers have made tents lighter over the years. A quilt is functionally the same as a sleeping bag, but it is 30% lighter weight, roughly at least. It doesn't have any insulation underneath it, as that insulation is useless when compressed as soon as you lay on top of it. Try leaving your puffy at home on warmer summer trips, and just bring a fleece instead. It is more versatile, yet when layered can be just as warm. Try leaving the stove at home and see what you think of cold soaking. I've done many videos on this if you want some recipes. A pillow can be left at home and instead improvised with a puffy jacket or unused layers. Use your phone as a GPS and save info about the trail for offline use so that you can leave guidebooks at home. A phone really is the king of all multi-use items. There is nothing more useful than it. Pay close attention to your GPS or your maps for water sources, as water is really heavy and carrying less of it when possible is an easy way to lighten up. You don't need 10 different stuff sacks to organize your gear. Pack everything loose inside your bag without them, and then use a single Ziploc for smaller items to keep those organized. The bigger items just don't need it. And of course, when looking at new gear online, spend some extra time to see if there is a lighter weight option. And this is extra important when shopping in person at a store, because a lot of gear looks really fun and cool and interesting in person, when really online you can find a lot better options. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this video. If you aren't already, subscribe to this channel. I do a lot of videos about ultralight gear, reviews, my gear list for different trails. I do videos about the big trips that I personally go on, and I think you might enjoy it if you liked this one. So anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next one.